video, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of intervals. We'll define what intervals are, and then we'll look at a particular set of intervals. In a later video, we will take this a step further and start to identify all the possible intervals there are. But for now, we're limiting ourselves to this particular initial first group of intervals. So, first of all, what is an interval? Well, an interval is the distance between any two notes. An interval can exist harmonically, where the notes are played together, or it can exist melodically, where the notes are played one after another. We've all experienced singing a melody, where in fact every note is an interval from the note before it. For example, la 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 la. As I sing the opening of that melody, you'll hear la la, that's an interval, and then la la, 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 that's an interval, la, that's an interval, la, that's an interval, melodically. Does that make sense? So you can have melodic intervals or harmonic intervals. The intervals are sounded together, creating harmonic intervals. They are sounded melodically, one after another. But an interval is always the distance between any two notes. Certainly you can have groups of 3 notes that are sounded together, or 4 notes. That gets us into chords, and we'll be discussing those later on. For now, we're dealing with intervals, any 2 notes. There are 2 notes involved in an interval. So what are some of the other characteristics of intervals? Well, one of the first things we need to know is that all intervals have a quantity and a quality. The quantity is represented by a number, and the quality is represented by a name. So the quantity is the number of the interval. We'll define how you figure the number out in a moment. And the quality is the specific name we give to that interval. So, when we're talking about the quantity, we're going to find that we are going to end up with a name, a number that is going to be representative of the quality of the interval. And those numbers are going to be unison, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and octave. Right? Now, in order to be able to understand intervals, we are going to have to encounter some names that we have for intervals and for note distances that will help us to be able to identify intervals. And so I'm going to start, before I go any further, with defining 2 terms for you. 3 terms for you. 3 different terms. The term unison, this simply refers to when 2 notes are sounded that are the same pitch or sounded simultaneously. So for example, you might have a clarinet playing middle C and a trumpet playing middle C, or an oboe playing middle C and a violin playing middle C. That interval, really, you know, there's no difference, right? They're playing the same note. But we call that a unison. Unison meaning together, oneness, and we're saying everyone is playing the same thing. But we have a name for it to keep our theory, our understanding of music theory, consistent. So the term unison is a term we use when different things are playing the same note, different instruments are playing, or different voices are singing the same note, and they are creating an interval even though there's not really any distance between the notes. They are both singing the same thing. That's a unison. Another term we need to know is octave. The term octave refers to a note and its repetition immediately above or below. So, as we know, we could start on the note C, but that's not the only C on the piano. And if we move up through the musical alphabet, indeed, we find that we reach another C up here. Those 2 notes, this is the starting note C, this is the repetition of that note immediately above, that is an octave. It can be done the other way too. I can have this note G, and I can go down until I find the note G again. This distance between this note G and this note G is an octave because it is the note you began with, G, and then its repetition immediately below. And that distance is called an octave. So that's another term you need to be aware of, unison and octave. Another term that you need to be aware of before we can really get into understanding intervals is the term half step. A half step is a term we use to define the distance between any note and its immediate neighbors. So from C going up to C sharp, that is a half step. From C going down to B, that is a half step. From B to B flat, that is a half step. From B flat to A is a half step. Any note and its immediate neighbor, that distance is called a half step. As you might imagine, if there is a half step, perhaps there is also a whole step. There is, we will get to that down the road. For now, the terms we need to be aware of are unison, octave, and half step. With those terms, we can start to unpack intervals a little bit more. So, as we have said, there is a quantity or a number to the interval. There is also a quality. These are specific names that we give. You will find your perfect intervals, major intervals, minor intervals, augmented intervals, and diminished intervals. These are the names that we give. They are labels, but they are very specific labels for specific types of interval. And you put these two things into combination with one another to create a complete name for your interval. So, the first concept we might get is you could say, for example, have a perfect fifth. And that would be a combination of a quality and a quantity. While that is all well and good, you can't just combine these names however you feel like it. There's a kind of an order and a specific way, a specific understanding of which qualities can be combined with which quantities. And so we will get to that in a moment. But the concept that you take a name and combine it with a number is a basic element to understanding intervals. So, in this video, what we have covered is the idea of quantity and quality, and we have also covered the names that we use within the quantity, specifically defining unison and octave. We have also defined the half step, and we have talked about the fact that there is a quality name that is used in interval identification. If you have those concepts in mind, you feel that you've understood that, then we will be ready to go on to the next video where we will start to put some of these things together. If you have not reached that point yet, if there's anything about this video that you are unclear on, now is the time to stop, to go back, to listen to it a couple more times and make sure you are clear on what we mean by quantity, what we mean by quality, what we mean by unison, octave, and half step, and just that you're aware of those terms and how they might be employed. Then we'll go on to the next step.